One of the things some people do not like about Christianity is that we tend daw to be too forgiving. Masyado daw tayong forgiving. That even if we know na importante ang forgiveness, importante ding wag magpatawad ng masyadong mabilis. Importante din to hold people accountable for their actions and to satisfy retribution before we can have reconciliation. It is about the need for assurance that justice is not forgotten even when we forgive. But, saan kaya nanggagaling tong reaction na ito? Is it possible na yung reaction na ito is founded on some kind of a misunderstanding about the Christian value of forgiveness? I think so. Ako sa palagay ko, oo. That many people misunderstand forgiveness. Kasi malinaw naman ang ating Christian tradition. Forgiveness in Christian tradition is just one of the 4 essential elements of the sacrament of reconciliation. Yes, you come to the sacrament of reconciliation, pero hindi ka aabot dun sa 4th component of forgiveness kung wala yung first 3. Pang-apat na yung forgiveness. Ano ba yung first 3? Confession, contrition, penance. And then pang-apat pa lang ang forgiveness. So, how do you expect forgiveness kung wala yung other 3 components? Ang ibig sabihin ng confession, pag-amin. It is the humble admission of our sinfulness. Ang ibig sabihin ng contrition ay pagsisisi. Meaning a sincere remorse for the harm that our actions may have caused on other people. And what about penance? Well, penance means the concrete effort to make amends or to do some acts of reparation for the wrong that we may have inflicted on others. Kaya, pang-apat na sangkap pa lang yung forgiveness. And the 4th element is not even called forgiveness, but absolution. Ang focus is actually on the effect of forgiveness. And what is that effect? Liberation. The liberation of the person who has been held captive by evil. And take note, these 4 elements together make up the sacrament. They are the necessary elements to facilitate reconciliation. Now, while we take for granted that the sacrament of reconciliation is a forgiving sacrament, madalas naman nating makalimutan, there is another forgiving sacrament in the life of the church. The Eucharist. The Eucharist is a forgiving sacrament. Unfortunately, we tend to turn it into an exclusive meal para sa mga banal at mga matutuwid. That is why, di ba noon, ginagawa pa ngang requirement, dapat nangumpisal ka muna bago ka magkomunyon. It was like that before. Parang requirement siya. You cannot receive communion if you did not go to confession. Parang ang reasoning nila ay, paano ka ba mag-enter into communion with the Lord if you are in a state of sin? At yung state of sin is commonly understood as a willful, deliberate choice to separate from God. But you know, in many ways, binago ni Jesus yung attitude natin towards sin and towards sinners by making us understand that for some people, sin is really a state of captivity, enslavement, pagkaalipin, enslavement to the evil one. And getting out of that captivity is not something we can do by ourselves. Kailangan natin ng tulong. It is only by understanding sin as spiritual enslavement that we can begin to treat sinners with mercy the way Jesus did. Kasi if we think of sin as a disease, parang sakit, maybe we can compare it to the mental state of some people who are struggling with addictions. Kasi hindi ganyang kadali. It is not, it can be a tall order to simply say to addicts na, to kick off the addiction like a bad habit. Ewan ko nga ba, bakit ang translation natin sa mga addict ay may masamang bisyo. But most addicts will tell you, yung addiction, hindi lang siya bisyo. Sakit siya. It is a disease. And people are not able to free themselves. They need help. Kaya magandang i-compare yung addiction dun sa sin. Para din siyang addiction. I think of the story of the raising of Lazarus as a good analogy for this. Remember, Jesus raised Lazarus back to life. Pero paglabas niya, nakatali pa rin siya. And Jesus asked the people around to help in unbinding Lazarus. Magandang analogy yon. Yung liberation that people need to experience, they need a lot of help for that. Jesus helps us imagine situations in which the option to do evil is not always a result of a deliberate choice. Pwede kasing maposes yung tao. It can be the effect of a state of evil possession. Or in a more ordinary language, being under the spell of evil. Parang nasasaniban. Kasi sometimes we can be in that kind of a spiritual state that is vulnerable. Pwede tayong maging prone to the contagion of evil. Di ba ganyan din naman ang pangangatawan natin eh? Kapag mahina yung immune system natin, madali tayo na ma-infect. If we may use the analogy of infectious diseases, parang ganun din. It is in situations like these that we become less judgmental, that we can become more considerate, even of people who may have offended us, even of people who may have betrayed us. This has to do with making room for the benefit of the doubts. Parang di ba may expression na ganyan? Give him the benefit of the doubt. That some people inflict harm on others not because they mean to, but because they couldn't help it, or that they had been overcome spiritually by the evil one. In short, may mga taong gumagawa ng masama, hindi dahil masama silang tao, but because they are under the spell of evil. Parang nandun sila sa spiritual state that makes simply demanding accountability a tall order. The evil that people do in some instances can actually be an expression of helplessness, a cry for help, or a desperate plea for deliverance. Kaya kung minsan, kahit gusto nating i-hold accountable yung ibang tao for their actions, may mga circumstances that can make it pointless to do it without making the necessary move to get people out of the evil spell that keeps them in a state of captivity. Maybe you're asking now, bakit tinawag kong forgiving sacrament ang Eucharist? Well, dahil ito yung okasyon, malinaw yung okasyon in which Jesus instituted the Eucharist at inuulit-ulit lagi sa bawat misa. Hindi ba? Sinasabi ng pare, on the night he was betrayed, he took bread. Ayun. On the night he was betrayed. Betrayed by whom? By Judas Iscariot. Ang Eucharist pala para kay Judas. At para sa lahat ng taong pwedeng maging Judas. Listen to how the words of consecration say it. Mamaya. The Gospels present the Last Supper as Jesus' winning move against the evil one. In plain language, we might say, ito yung panlaban ni Jesus. It was the weapon that Jesus used in order to break the spell of evil, not just on Judas Iscariot, but on the rest of the 12 apostles. Alam niyo ba, pag binasa niyo kay St. Luke at kay St. John, pareho nilang sinasabi that when Judas betrayed Jesus, Satan entered into him. Pinasok daw ni Satanas si Judas. Kaya, wala siya sa sarili. Nung gabi nung hapunan na yon, parang wala ka mang makitang remorse sa kanya. Binayaran na siya ng 30 pieces of silver. Pero kaya pa niyang humarap kay Jesus. Kaya pa niyang makipagtsikahan. Kaya pa niyang makipaghapunan. He could break bread with Jesus. At nung sabihin ni Jesus, one of you will betray me, aba kasama pa siya nagtatanong, alangan namang ako. Without batting an eyelash. Di ba kaya minsan? Para walang guilt. Walang guilt. May mga taong nasanay na sa kasalanan na parang di na nararamdaman. And it was at that very moment that Jesus turned the meal of betrayal into a meal of forgiveness. And so, the evangelist tells us, Jesus took the bread and the wine and offered them as His body and blood. Meaning, offered them as sacraments of His passion and death on the cross, His act of self-offering as a sacrificial lamb. What for? Sabi pa ulit ng Eucharistic prayer, so that sins may be forgiven. Ayun ang dahilan kung bakit tinatawag kong a forgiving sacrament. Jesus offers His body and blood for our forgiveness, so that sins may be forgiven. You know, I prefer to understand that in the sense of, so that those enslaved by sin may be liberated. Kaya sabi niya, take and eat, this is my body. Take and drink, this is my blood. It was His way of saying, I will not offer an animal for you. I myself will be the lamb. I will offer my life for you, for your deliverance from the angel of death who has taken possession of you. Kung minsan, hindi talaga natin mapipigilan yung masamang desisyon ng tao. Lalo na kung hawak sila ni Satanas. Ang Eucharistia, yun lang ang pag-asa natin. Today, let us consciously receive the Eucharist para sa mga hibang. Let us consciously receive the body and blood of Christ para sa mga inaalihan ng demonyo at nawawala sa sarili. Let us receive it not for ourselves, but for the liberation, the deliverance of people who are under the spell of the evil one. At the Eucharist, when we receive Christ, He allows us to enter into communion with Him so that we can become part of His body. And that way, we are also able to take part in His work of deliverance, the work of delivering other fellow slaves, other fellow captives. By learning the same technique, the Eucharist, ito yung secret for counteracting evil. Counteracting evil. By learning the technique of Jesus, we discover the power of the sacrament of radical love, which is the only thing that can break the spell of evil and bring about deliverance.